Okay, we are now live.
Excellent.
Welcome, everyone. We will be starting in another minute or so once all our attendees have entered the webinar. So just hold on, please. Okay, it's 7 o'clock and I'm going to get us started. Thank you for joining us this evening for the second of 13 webinars we're offering to members of the Michigan Master Gardener Association. I'm Sue Augard and I'm the Vice President and the Co-Treasurer. I'd like to introduce the rest of our executive committee. We have Vicki Lauren with us tonight, who's our secretary, Norm Shear, who's our president,
Hello,
and
everybody.
Ruth Steelwalker, who is co-treasurer. Ruth is going to be introducing our guest speaker tonight, Eric.
Thank you, Sue. Eric Elgin is a water resource educator with Michigan State University Extension. And as someone who lives on the water and has seen their beach overtaken by Phragmites, this is a subject I'm passionate about, and I'm looking forward to hearing Eric tonight, both because he's going to be talking about aquatic invasive plants on the beach and also, if I understood correctly, in the water. He's going to give us tips on how to identify them and talk about how they threaten Michigan waters and what you can do when you find one. He has hands-on knowledge, which is bolstered by a master's in aquatic ecology and a bachelor's degree in natural resources and water resources management. We're glad you could join us for this talk that focuses on aquatic plant protection, natural shoreline restoration, and lake ecology outreach. Eric, take it away.
Thank you, Ruth. Yes, you are right. I'm going to actually be focusing almost singularly on the plants in the water. So that's where we're going to be looking at today. Thank you for inviting me to this group. And I hope you all gain a lot. So as Ruth was saying, I'm going to be developing skills for early detection. So what that means is identification. Like that's the best skill you can have for early detection. So we're going to be covering some of the more common invasive aquatic plants and how to identify them, and then also cover the up and comers, the ones that we've have determined may cause a major threat to Michigan's waters. So let's talk a little, let me make sure I can slide. There we go. So when we talk about plant identification in water, so aquatic plants, we usually first start at the community level, and there's multiple communities. So this is a cross section of a lake. You know, this is what you can imagine is the shoreline, and this is the place where we swim, and then it goes into the deep parts of a lake. Now, this thing called the euphotic zone, that's the zone of a lake where photosynthesis, there's enough light for photosynthesis to occur. Now, when the euphotic zone passes and touches the sediment, this is the area where rooted aquatic plants can grow, and that's called the littoral zone. This is our classic pond weeds, our water lilies. So those are floating leaf plants. There's the submerged plants like the potamogetons, the pond weeds. And then when we get into the more shallow water, that's where we get into our emergent species. So for natives, that might be hardstem bulrush. For invasives, that could be Phragmites. And then we have our terrestrial plants. So what I'm going to be talking entirely about today is the littoral zone. And I'm going to be looking at floating leaf plants, free floating leaf plants, and submersed plants. And just a little bit of a background on this plant community. It's incredibly diverse. It's wonderful. So the title of this, I love this slide, an underwater forest. If any of you have been able to snorkel in a lake here in Michigan or anywhere, a natural lake is beautiful. Some of these submersed plants can go up to 10 feet long. And so if you dive down in, you can swim amongst a forest of aquatic plants. And it's not just the diversity, there's a tremendous amount of value to the system, to a lake, but then also to us. And so one of the valuable components of this is it provides structure to a lake, and that helps with habitat. So something that we all love to do here in Michigan is fish, and aquatic plants provide pivotal, important habitat for fish, but then also for a whole bunch of other critters that live in lakes. They also, due to how they compete with algae for nutrients, they can keep the water clearer. So aquatic plants actually help the water become more clear by competing with algae for nutrients and light. And then also they create a carpeting effect on the bottom of a lake. And so when the wave energy is coming through, there's little to no sediment resuspension. And so you don't get a cloudy water from sediment kicking up from the bottom. And then also the stems of aquatic plants, although are very bendable and pliable, they absorb energy. So when the waves are coming into a shoreline, the aquatic plants absorb that energy, and so that it lessens it when it slams into a shoreline, so reducing erosion, for example. And then one other thing is that they're beautiful. Man, there's some beautiful plants out there. If we were in person, I would ask everyone, does anyone know what this plant is? And so I'll just leave it for a moment. Has anyone seen this plant before? This is the wonderful blossom of our yellow water lily. Also, spatterdock is another common name. That's Nuphar variegata. Oftentimes our white water lily gets a lot of attention because it's the classic multiple petals and sepals, just looking brilliant. But I think the yellow water lily is very beautiful as well. Or here's a couple others. This solitary plant that we're seeing here. This is Illinois pondweed, or Potamogeton illinoisensis. And this ground cover that we're seeing here is sago pondweed. I hope some of you have seen this blossoming out of lakes or wetlands that you've been in. This is bladderwort, greater bladderwort, or Utricularia vulgaris. I remember when I first saw this in high school, before I really knew much about plants, I thought I was seeing orchids bloom out of the water. But it's this plant, and this plant's really interesting. So first of all, the flower is beautiful, but it's also a carnivorous plant. So underneath the water, it actually has little bladders that open and close quickly enough that it grabs little organisms, invertebrates in the water, and dissolves them and consumes their nutrients. Here's the wonderful texture some of these aquatic plants can. This is actually an algae. This is called a macroalgae, so a large algae. And this is called musk grass, or Chara is the genus. if anyone's been swimming in a lake or been fishing and pull up their anchor or anything, and they smell a really potent smell, this genera produces a lot of that smell, hence the common name muskgrass. And of course, here's a nice picture with a frog in it, but if you look at all those plants, you're looking at the world's smallest flowering plant. So that's these little ones here. Oftentimes these can be confused with algae, but in fact they're nice native plants. By the way, all of them that I've listed so far have been native. There's actually 3 species of plants in this picture. We have what we consider duckweed, that's Lemna turionifera, that's right here. We have greater duckweed, Spirodella polyrhiza. And then these little plants are called watermeal or wolfia. So just taking a close look, the texture is amazing. So anyways, I wanted to show some of these plants because the diversity is great. And this is only a tiny select handful. And that aquatic plants have a lot of value to our aquatic systems. Unfortunately, we also have invasive species. And so now this is where the focus of my talk is going to be, is that we have a lot of aquatic invasive plants. And although native plants can be robust and cover large areas and be thick, our invasive plants can be much worse and fill the entire volume of the water column and create a lot of different impacts from what you can see here. So just quickly, some just basics of what we see in our lakes when aquatic invasive plants move in, is that we see a reduction in diversity. We have impacts to fisheries because although aquatic plants are really important for fish habitat, there's a relationship where if it gets so dense, there's actually can be a negative relationship with fish. It reduces light penetration. So what we're seeing here is European frogbit, and that's floating up on the surface. And you can imagine there's not too much light reaching below this canopy of leaves. And so now you have a reduction in diversity of aquatic plants because of that. And then all of this biomass dying in the fall, dropping down into the water column, you can actually have a reduction in dissolved oxygen within the water. Because as all that biomass is getting decomposed, that uses oxygen. There's a lot of work showing that when invasive species moves into different lakes or water bodies, it actually reduces property value. So now here's an economic impact from invasive species. And also, so you have it, there's multiple different ways you can manage these aquatic invasive plants. One of the most common ways is with herbicide, but that can be a tremendous impact to the economics of your pocketbook or your lake associations, from $200 to $2,000 per acre. And oftentimes, if you don't catch it early, these management options don't eliminate the plant. So you're actually in perpetuity will be doing some management on this on these species if you don't get to them in time. So the introduction pathway that I'd like to talk about, because we're talking to master gardeners here, is the horticulture trade. So what I mean by introduction pathway is how do these invasive plants get into our environment? And one of the ways, among many, is the horticultural trade. And what I mean by that is because we enjoy water gardens and even going into our homes and saying aquariums, and we are purchasing plants and moving plants across state borders, across continent borders and things like that, that increases the chance of something being bad introduced into our into the wild. And so there was a really interesting study in the early 2000s where, so the federal government and the state governments have a prohibited list of species. So certain species we just know would be terrible to have released into Michigan waters. So there's certain plants that are illegal to have in the state. Well, in Minnesota, they did a study where they just went online and tried to buy the prohibited plants. And lo and behold, they 95% of the time from the study show that they could bring across state borders a highly invasive plant. So that's increases the risk of it getting out. There's also incidental inclusion. And so if people on this webinar may have seen, but there's what I mean by incidental inclusion is that you may purchase a perfectly fine plant for your water garden, not going to cause any threats to the wild if it gets loose. But there's a hitchhiker on there. There's a plant that you didn't purchase that's latched onto a stem. And so they found that many plants that we purchase have an incidental species on it. The thing that's hitting the news last week was with moss balls. I don't know if anyone's heard this last week, is that there's a certain moss ball that people purchase for aquariums, and it was being distributed around the United States, and it was infested with zebra mussels. So the unknowing introduction of invasive species that way. Also, a problem is incorrect identification. And so you might be aware like, oh, hydrilla is a bad plant. You knew that from this webinar that you took from me. But when you go to a nursery, it may not be labeled hydrilla, it may be labeled anacharis, which is incorrect labeling, an old name. And so you'd purchase it, and that increases the risk. Also, there's remnant populations. So before there were laws, we could purchase plants like this, yellow floating heart. This is now a prohibited species here in the state. You once were able to purchase it legally, and that is also a threat into the natural environment from these remnant populations. But really, all of what I just mentioned is it's not a problem if the plant doesn't reach the wild. If it doesn't leave the fish tank, if it never leaves your water garden or a threat to leave your water garden, it's not a problem. But we often see that things do get out. And sometimes it only takes one. And I should mention that I don't talk about this in my presentation, but many aquatic plants are able to reproduce by fragments. So it doesn't need to flower and produce seeds or turions or winter buds. They can produce by a stem fragment. And all you need is one node where the leaves are coming out and that getting out, and that can produce a whole new plant and then a whole new population. So here's an example of a misidentification that I took here in Michigan. This is parrot feather, this plant right here. And parrot feather is Myriophyllum aquaticum. As you can see here, they have it labeled mare's tail or Hipparus vulgaris. Hipparus vulgaris is actually a native species here in Michigan, but this is certainly not Hipparus vulgaris. And then what's interesting is on that, they actually are getting closer with this identification, Myriophyllum brasiliensis, but that's actually an old synonym for Myriophyllum aquaticum or parrot feather, which is illegal to have and is a large threat to the state waters. So this is how misidentification can happen. You can the best intent to buy the correct plants, but you have to be careful. And why I mentioned about the it's not a threat unless it gets out. It's amazing how much of our waters are connected. So I zoomed into a random place in Oakland County, and I chose Oakland County just because it has a lot of water. And these are many waterways that are in residential areas. So these are different residential ponds. And as you can see with all of this, there is a lot of connections. And so if there was an accidental invasion in this pond right here, or an intentional invasion where somebody was like, I don't want my aquarium anymore, and you dump it into this water body, you can get now movement throughout this whole system due to the connectivity of the water bodies. So what can we do? This figure is kind of a classic way of how we see invasions occur on our landscape. So how to interpret this is on this axis, we have area occupied. So meaning a lot of area is occupied by that invasive species or very little. And then here we have the stages of invasion. And so early on, the species is absent. It is not there. But then you have a point of introduction. So you have the entry of the invasive species into a water body, for example. And then through time, if they are not managed, it increases in size, very intuitive. And at some point, it is covering all the area that it can cover for the most part. So and then now these boxes, what these boxes are saying, prevention, eradication, containment, and asset-based protection, those are the management options that we typically recommend at these different stages of invasion. And so when a species is absent, we want to be preventing as much as possible. Prevention is the cheapest thing we can do. If we can keep it from entering our system, is the best thing that we could do. But what if something does get in? Because there's lots of reasons why something can enter our water bodies, so we have an entry point. What we want to start getting to is eradication. So this is where early detection is important. If we can detect a species before it is in too much of a large area, we can still eradicate it. That's really important. And so the key to eradication is early detection. Because once we get up in here, although early detection is important still, it's not as important because now it's really hard to eliminate that species from a system. So we want to spend our time here, and that's going to be that's why we're meeting tonight. So prevention, I'm not going to talk too much about this, but it is so important. This is the most important piece. We have many different programs in the state that help with prevention. So Clean Boats, Clean Waters is helping with the spread of invasive plants and species by recreational boating, by fishing, by the different gear that we bring from lake to lake to lake. So Clean Boats, Clean Waters is working there. The Ripple program is working with the aquarium and water garden trade to help teach them what not to sell, and also just give a bunch of different education on aquatic invasive species. And then there's a nationwide program called Stop Aquatic Hitchhikers, Clean, Drain, Dry. And so that's kind of the slogan of Clean, Drain, Dry is if you are an infested water body, you can clean all of your gear, drain it and dry it, and you should be that'll help prevent the spread of those invasive species from water body to water body. But what if that species comes in? So now we're looking at this early detection period around here. So what does early detection require? Identification. So let's get into now the meat of my presentation, which is looking at different species that we have here in the state and or are predicted to might come into the state that have a threat. And we're just going to march through each one, and I'm going to give tips for the identification of these plants. So really what the hope is at the end of this presentation, you may not remember all those tips and details, but hopefully it'll trigger if you are out in the field doing your own gardening or just out and about and you notice a certain species, hopefully that'll trigger an early detection warning and we can follow up. So how I organize this is our first 3 plants that we're going to cover are the established aquatic plants in Michigan. So there's actually not that many, which is good, but these are big ones. So if anyone recognizes this here, this is Eurasian water milfoil. This has been in the state for over 100 years. Curlyleaf pondweed also been here for over 100 years. And then a more newcomer, which is starry stonewort. This is not a plant at all. This is a macroalgae. And this is just one structure of that plant, and I'll show you how to identify all 3 of these. Something to mention, many aquatic plants, so unlike terrestrial plants, some terrestrial plants we identify with the flower. That really is helpful to have the flower to identify. But in aquatic plants, we may not see certain plants flower. And so we spend a lot of time on the vegetative characteristics. And I'll be covering both of them here, but that's why some of these plants you'll see that I cover almost exclusively with the leaves, for example. So Eurasian water milfoil. There are I think 6 native milfoils in the state, and they're wonderful. And unfortunately, most of them, they look very similar. So how can you tell Eurasian milfoil from the native milfoils? And then how can you tell you just have Eurasian milfoil? So Eurasian milfoil is a submersed plant. The only thing that pops above the water line will be the flower. So the flowering structure is above. It looks fair. It's smaller than my pinky. The inflorescence, that is. If you pick a plant out of the water and it looks like the leaves, so I have a depiction here. This is a cross section of the plant. So here's the plant. I cut the stem so that you can see here is one whole leaf. It kind of looks like a fern, or I always describe it kind of as a kid's Christmas tree where they have the trunk and then the branches coming off. That's the leaf. And then those branches coming off of the kid's Christmas tree, those are called the leaflet. So think of this as like a compound leaf that you would have like on ash trees. That this is like a compound leaf, but in aquatics we call this a finely divided leaf. So here's the tip: if you see whorled leaf arrangement, so leaf arrangement is referring to where the leaves are coming off on the stem. So whorled is all on one plane. There's multiple leaves coming off. Where alternate would be something like this. Hopefully you can all see me, but leaf coming off one, and then if this is the stem, the next leaf is coming off here. So this would be alternate, and this would be opposite. So if it's a whorled leaf arrangement, and when you count the leaflets, you have 12 or more pairs. So you can just count one side, and if you have 12 or more, and it's whorled, you have Eurasian water milfoil. So here's a little quiz that you can just think of for yourself. Are any of these Eurasian water milfoil? Is this one milfoil? Well, this one is not milfoil. This is coontail. As you can see, this is one leaf here, and it doesn't look like a kid's Christmas tree or a fern or a feather. Instead, this looks like a wishbone. And so this is not Eurasian milfoil. This is coontail. That's a native plant. How about this one? This is one leaf. As you can see, it's kind of similar to Eurasian milfoil, but this is heavily branched, is what we call this. And also look at these little structures here. This is a leaf of bladderwort. So this is not Eurasian milfoil. And so now here's a tricky one. This is definitely a feather-like leaf. It looks like a kid's Christmas tree. But if you counted the edges, this is not Eurasian milfoil. It doesn't have 12 or more leaflets. So none of these are Eurasian milfoil, but here is a picture of Eurasian milfoil. So curlyleaf pondweed, again, all over the place when we look at the distribution map. And with Michigan showing just that much, it's probably just it's detected, but underreported. And I think later on in this webinar series, you're gonna be, somebody from MISN is going to be talking. So that's a place where you can report invasive species. So that's important so that we understand what is here and where. So curlyleaf pondweed, what's nice about this, there's 28 species of pondweeds in Michigan. But the only one with serrated leaves all along the edge is curlyleaf pondweed. So if you pull out a plant out of the water and you see an obvious midvein, you also see, this is kind of hard to see, but you see alternate leaf arrangement. So alternate leaf arrangement, an obvious midvein, and a serrated edge, the serrated margin, then you have curlyleaf pondweed. So just those three characteristics. Starry stonewort, this can be very tough to identify. It's easy and hard at the same time. It's easy if you can find this structure here. This is called a bulbul. This is a vegetative reproductive structure. As you can see, this is where starry stonewort gets its name, because this structure looks like a star. And you can see it's connected to the plant with something that looks like fishing line. So if you pull up a plant that's really thick, that kind of looks like this, but it easily breaks apart, has this star bulbul on fishing line kind of structure called rhizoids, you're holding on to starry stonewort. This plant is relatively new in the state. And as you can see, it's not in a whole lot of different areas. It's brand new coming up in Minnesota and Wisconsin, and they're acting very quickly, but we have many, many lakes here in the state. But I think any lakes in the UP have been identified with starry stonewort yet, and let's hope it doesn't. I wanted to mention, here's a lookalike to starry stonewort. This is a very common plant. This is Cara again, that musk grass that I showed. There's a bunch of species of musk grass in the state, and it's a really beneficial plant for critters and water quality. How can you tell the difference? The big one is that there's no star bulbils. They might have bulbils, but they're going to be completely round. Excuse me. And they're much shorter branches, and where muskrat smells, starry stonewort will not have that smell. So that's what you can see people doing, smelling this heap of plants. So now moving on to a different group of plants. And what we have, this is a Michigan watch list species. So these are species that have been determined have never been detected in the state in the wild, or have limited distribution. So they're not common. And they have a high potential for negative impacts. So due to looking at risk assessments and things, this is how we've determined that this plant could have a big impact if released into the wild. And the big part, these plants have been listed so that we can help with early detection and response and rapid response. So hopefully that we can eradicate these different species when we find them. So we have hydrilla, Brazilian elodea, water hyacinth, water lettuce, European water clover, water chestnut, European frogbit, water soldier, parrot feather, and yellow floating heart. And I'm going to be going through these now. And of course, within 30 minutes, how much, will you be able to retain? But I hope there's little bits that you'll be able to keep an eye out once you're out and gardening. So European frogbit is where I'm starting. So I started with this plant because this is a plant that we're starting to see in more and more locations. So for the longest time, starting in the 90s, we were seeing European frogbit build up in the coastal wetlands of Lake Erie, Lake St. Clair, then Saginaw Bay, in other parts of Lake Huron, and then up into the Sault Ste. Marie area. And what we were seeing is that they were lodged into the Phragmites, which is giant reed, an invasive emergent plant, and narrowleaf cattail, another invasive emergent plant. Because these are free-floating plants. And so they get pushed into these wetland areas, and they thrive, creating these very thick, huge mats. In 2016, so we were seeing that for years, but we really weren't seeing anything move inland. But in 2016, we saw a big jump, and we found it in Reeds and Fisk Lake in Grand Rapids. And then just recently, we have now found it in Pentwater Lake, in the Lower Grand River, in the Waterloo area, Pinckney Waterloo area. There's a few lakes there, and then also Dansville State Game Area. Still not all over the place, but it's not, the threat is there. So how do you identify European frogbit? What's nice is it's a pretty big free floating plant. So when we say rosette, that's also can be called basal. So basal rosette, where all the leaves are coming from a central location, and then the roots are all dangling below. A pretty small leaf, 2 to 3 inches, and it's heart-shaped, as you can see. And it has a small white flower with 3 petals and a yellow anthers and reproductive structure. What's nice about this, so they also show that they're connected. So they send out runners, which is good to creating these huge mats. So what does it look like in real life when looking from a boat? Is this. So here's our narrowleaf cattail, that invasive species that creates a pretty monoculture habitat. We have our white water lilies. So you can see how white water lily comes in many different sizes. So here are pretty big leaves, but pretty small as well. But now all these little plants here that are actually pretty hard to distinguish in the picture, that's European frogbit. So here's our quiz slide. So are either of these plants European frogbit? So this one's easy on this side, right? So here's that yellow flower that I showed you early on. This is yellow water lily. So this is not. Also, so yellow flower, that's one big giveaway. But then also this leaf is very elongated and large. So here's inches over here. So it's definitely over 2 to 3 inches. Also, if you're seeing this out in the field, this is rooted in the bottom. So it's not free floating at all. The stems go down into the bottom sediment, anchoring itself there. How about this plant? Kind of looks like Pac-Man, kind of has the shape of European frogbit. But what's, again, is the size. So here's inches. So we're looking at multiple inches, not 2 to 3. This is also in the field rooted on the bottom compared to frogbit, which will be free floating. So there's white water lily and yellow water lily. So moving on to hydrilla. This is the case where it's Hydrilla verticillata is the Latin name, but we also use that as the common name, hydrilla. So it can be really large masses, and here's a picture of a cross section of a node. So how do you identify hydrilla? Well, so here's kind of the pictorial of the plant. When you look at one node, you can see that there are 4 to 8 leaves that come out of those, out of the stem. You can see with your naked eye serrations. And if you flip the leaf upside down, you will be able to see these teeth or hooks are on the mid vein of the backside of the leaf. So no other plant has those serrations that you can easily see with all of those leaves coming out of an axis. We have not seen this in Michigan, and hopefully we will not. This plant is considered one of the worst aquatic invasive plants in the world. But as you can see, it is nearby. So early detection is so important here. And here's that a cautionary tale. It was found in one lake called Lake Manitou in Michigan, or sorry, in Indiana. And when they detected it, it was found all around the lake. They have been treating it for over 8 years to eradicate this plant, and it's cost over $2 million to do this treatment and surveying and monitoring so far. They had to close boat ramps. And although this seems extreme, like, whoa, what for one lake? There are over 4,000 lakes within a 75-mile radius of this lake. And the risk, if this plant got out into other water bodies, it would cost way more than $2 million. And it would continuously cost a lot of money because it would be very difficult to eradicate. Lake Manitou is a success story. They've been able to do a really good job. And I believe it's either eradicated or almost there. So this is a really tough plant to get rid of. Here's a very similar plant to hydrilla, Brazilian elodea. This is a common plant, what you may have learned about photosynthesis in school. You know, your teacher maybe ordered this plant and you could be able to see bubbles coming off of the leaves. So this is again, this is just like hydrilla, where you have 4 to 8 leaves coming off of a whorl. But here there are fine teeth, but it usually requires a hand lens to see. So that's a big difference there. And if you tipped the leaf and looked at the underside, there would be no teeth. So this plant also has not been seen in Michigan. Here's our quiz slide. Is this hydrilla or Brazilian elodea? The plant looks just like it, but here's the key, right? How many leaves are coming off of that node? Just 3. And so 3, you know, with hydrilla and Egeria, that is, you need 4 to 8. Something that's important is when you look at the number of leaves per whorl, you should probably look at multiple locations. So when it says 4 to 8, it needs to consistently be 4 to 8. Also, when you look, this is kind of hard to see, a little fuzzy, but there's no serrations on these leaves. So this is our native Elodea, or Canada waterweed. Very common plant. And here, for example, is the cross-section of hydrilla, where those obvious teeth are. Okay, parrot feather. As you can see, this is a interesting looking plant. Very beautiful when you look at it in isolation. It emerges out of the water and creates these waxy type leaves that can handle the stress of being out of the water. And it creates a little forest, as you can see here. So how do you tell? So this is the genus Myriophyllum. So this is related to Eurasian water milfoil. But whereas Eurasian milfoil, the only thing that emerges out of the water is the flower, here we actually have leaves emerging out of the water. And the leaves that emerge out of the water look like the leaves underneath the water. So we have a water line and we have this, except the ones that are out of the water have a waxy cuticle. If you can recall back a few slides, Eurasian milfoil has 12 or more leaflets per leaf, where here there's 6 to 30 and are whirled around the stem. This plant has popped up around the state through time, and the state, through the Michigan Department of Environment, Great Lakes and Energy, formerly known as DEQ, the Department of Environmental Quality, they have been eradicating multiple populations of parrot feather around the state, typically in small residential ponds. And they go in with resources and expertise to come in and help remove that population and eradicate that population before it has a chance of getting out. So is this parrot feather? Here's what it looks like out. So obviously something is emerging out of the water. And here's a close-up of what's emerging out of the water. And the answer would be no, these leaves don't have that feather looking or kid's Christmas tree look. This is mare's tail, I think is the common name, Hipparus vulgaris. Water hyacinth. This plant is legal to have in the state of Michigan. I should have mentioned that. And actually, I'm just going to quickly go back to show you because this is valuable. So here are those watch list species. The ones in red are legal for sale and possession. So you can have these in the state. These others you cannot, but these you can still have in the state. So that's water hyacinth, water lettuce, and European water clover. But it's on the list because this is also seen next to hydrilla as one of the worst aquatic invasive plants in the world, and causes huge headaches all around the globe. As you can see, it has been found in multiple locations across the state, specifically centered around Southeast Michigan. Very beautiful flower, very ornamental, so you can see why we would be drawn to it as gardeners. So how do you identify water hyacinth? The biggest thing is, so the leaf stalk is known as the petiole. If the petiole is inflated, so if you go out and if you're out on a lake and you see this free floating plant that's big, so you'll be holding it in your hand like this, and it has big lavender flowers and you have inflated petioles, you're looking at water hyacinth. So is this water hyacinth in this picture? So things to look for, because it's very similar if it is not. So it has purple flowers, kind of has that leaf that looks like that. But let's look at the petiole. So here's the petiole. There's no inflated petiole. So there's no big inflation balloon-like structure. Also, if we were out in the field, you would know this is anchored to the bottom. So this is rooted to the bottom where water hyacinth would not be. So this is pickerel weed, a wonderful native plant. that's great to have on our shorelines. So water lettuce, very similar to water hyacinth, is that it's a free-floating plant, again, fairly big, so you'd be grabbing it and holding it like this. The roots are dangling below. The leaves are very furry, so this is kind of the texture is what it's showing off here. The leaves are very thick and ridged. There's nothing like it. Again, we have seen it kind of below 96, you can say. That's where we've had it in a couple locations. These two plants, water hyacinth and water lettuce, there's a lack of evidence that it can handle Michigan winters. So we don't know if it overwinters well. Actually, most evidence shows that it cannot overwinter. But there's a threat that it can, and so hence why it's on this list, especially because if it gets in, it can potentially cause issues. So here's some real life pictures, as you can see, holding it like this. So that's the size. Because these last two are free floating, you'll see them nudged up against the shoreline or amongst emergent plants where they get caught up and get pushed by the wind or wave energy. Yellow floating heart. We see this in various locations in the state, usually in old residential ponds. Very, very beautiful flower. It's fringed petals. The leaves look like white water lily, kind of like yellow water lily, our native species. But as you can see, it's called scalloped edges. So it has that wavy leaf margin. And where our other native water lilies do not have that. This plant is rooted to the bottom. Is this yellow floating heart? Not quite. This is called hydrocotyl. That sinus, that deep notch, isn't very deep in here. These are also, I should have shown for size, these are not very large in size, aren't getting 4 inches across like yellow floating heart will, and don't have large yellow flowers. European water clover, probably the easiest one to identify because there's nothing like it. It looks like a 4-leaf clover, but in the water. Some of them can be floating on the surface, or sometimes it's emerging out of the water. Not found in very many locations, but there are persistent populations actually of this plant in the state. If anyone lives in the Ann Arbor area, the Huron River has those multiple dams, and so they have some slow areas within the river, and there is a population along the edge of the Huron River there. Yeah, it's great that it's so obviously different than anything else. Water soldier is in the same conversation. It's very different. It can be submerged at parts of its life, or it can be floating, and it's all a rosette, so all the leaves are coming down to one location. And again, in the early parts of the year, you'll see it below the surface, and then it'll look like a pineapple top that's floating up on the surface of the lake, or like an aloe plant. Very sharply serrated, like it's a robust plant. You would feel that it is very rough. There's only 5 locations known, I believe, in North America, and they're all in Ontario. But because they're in the Great Lakes Basin, that's a high threat for us. Here's an example of how, as the population is getting close, it's submersed here, but there are some that are emerging. Very different kind of plant than anything we have in the state that's native. And our last one, water chestnut. These are very different as well. They are mostly free floating, but now they can in shallower water root down. But we're looking at triangular toothed leaves. The petioles are slightly inflated. So the petiole is referring again to this leaf stalk. And you see that there's slightly inflated. That helps it keep free floating. The fruits, so here, the fruits in this picture are unlike anything else. They're very robust and large, sharp spines. and the plant can be pretty big, like how much it spreads out. We have not seen this in the state, but as you can see, it's in the Great Lakes Basin in quite a big distribution to the east. Here's a real life picture of it. So there's the key identification. That was a lot, I realize, and I'd be happy when we are at the end if there's any questions that you'd like me to go back to any of those slides and we can talk about. But now let's say, so now here's what else is part of early detection is the reporting piece. So you suspect you now found one of these species. What should you do? And so confirming identification is important. And I'll be showing you some links that you can go to report and confirm identification. But that's important. So either talk to your master gardener network. Of course, there's the Ask an Expert that we all can tap into. It's important to take really good pictures and take pictures of different parts of the plant, and I'll cover that in a moment. Actually, no, sorry, it's right here. So take pictures where scale is important. So having, this is great because this has actual scale bars, but your hand will do as well. Putting it just on the table without scale of a pen or a nickel or something like that, all that can work for scale. And always feel free. I'll be giving my email out. So if you do spend a lot of time in water gardens, feel free. You can email me, and you might get if I'm sitting at my desk and looking at my email, you might get an automatic response from me for identification. And so now, what if you learn it's a native species? What I would say is learn more about that plant and enjoy it. Like I mentioned, they're really cool, and there's a lot of diversity under the water, and we should be protecting that diversity. But now, what if it's one of those established species? So is it Eurasian milfoil, curlyleaf pondweed, or starry stonewort? Well, depending on the system you're in and where you are, you might want to notify, if it's a lake association or lake board or conservation group, you may want to notify. Even if you find it in a large chunk of the lake, some organizations may not be aware of it. So still reporting it is key, and that's where you can report it in MISN, and you'll be learning more about that in other webinars and part of this series. And then it's time to consider management. So should you be managing that established species? And what are the pros and cons of the different management techniques? And now what if it's a watch list species? So that's that laundry list of species we just went through. We want to report that immediately. And so with a picture, with a location, if you can get a GPS mark, that's always helpful, or an address. But if you can get a latitude, longitude with some pictures and a description about the abundance, that will be key when you're doing your reporting. So how do you report? For watch list species, you can report it online at MISN. So this is a database that the state has set up that you can, for our invasive species, and you can sign in and report species that you find. If that's not something you want to do, so you can do that either online or on an app on your phone. But if that's if that's something you don't want to do, or for whatever reason are having problems with it, you can contact the Eagle Aquatic Invasive Species Program, Aquatic Nuisance Control. And this is for aquatic plants. So if you're finding a different species, like in the terrestrial world, you wouldn't be contacting them. This is just for aquatic. So eagle-wrd-anc@michigan.gov, or give them a call. If you're, all of us are probably intertwined doing some conservation, gardening and stuff like that in our local areas, there's also across the state are called SISMA. So you can also contact your local SISMA as a way to report one of these species. And so a SISMA is the Michigan Cooperative Invasive Species Management Areas. So that's what SISMA stands for. You can go to the website and find out where you live and find the contact for your county. I didn't write that email because the email is long and not helpful. So if you what's more helpful is if you typed in Michigan Cooperative Invasive Species Management Areas into Google or whatever search engine you would like, you will be able to find this website and find the contacts that fit for you. And they're a wonderful resource. If you want to be more involved, let's say you live on a lake, or you love you live near lakes that you love to visit or kayak on or fish on or recreate on, there's a program called the Cooperative Lakes Monitoring Program. So this is a citizen science program where we train individuals to go out and collect scientifically sound data. So following protocols, and we provide resources and expertise to help. And so that's for lakes in general, Cooperative Lakes Monitoring Program. But one of the parameters that you can sign up for is called the Exotic Aquatic Plant Watch. So that's an early detection survey for aquatic invasive plants on lakes. And so if you are interested in being more active and maybe you really enjoy aquatic plants in general, or want to get more involved, this is a great program. And so we train you on a certain protocol that you would go out onto a water body and collect data. And then you'll be reporting that into our database, which then talks to MISN and other databases as well. So if you are interested in that, you can visit mycorps.net. So that's MICORPS.net. And registration for that program is not open yet. We're retooling the website, but that will be available in the next few weeks. But if you go to mycorps.net, you can sign up for a listserv, and we will contact you when registration is open. So a few resources that I wanted to talk about, if you are interested in aquatic plant identification, is Through the Looking Glass. It's a great book. You can get it from the University of Wisconsin Extension's website. It's going to be much cheaper there than compared to Amazon, for example. This is a great beginner guide. It has wonderful line drawing illustrations as well as information. And this is for invasive and native that you can see. And here's some, if you really like dichotomous keys, you can use this: Aquatic and Wetland Plants of Northeastern North America. There's the Aquatic Plants of the Upper Midwest. That has a great dichotomous keys as well as great color images of most of the aquatic plants that we'll have here in the state. If you're really curious about those invasive species, there's a great guide that Eagle has created called the Michigan Watch List Aquatic Invasive Plants. So this is a great, simple guide to identify all those plants that I just covered. This is a great little pocket guide that you can take out with you. So thank you very much. I know that was a run through of a lot of plants. I hope though that you were able to get something from it. If you want to contact me, feel free to email me. I'm always happy to have a conversation too. So you can email me and we can set up a meeting. And if you're interested in that Cooperative Lakes Monitoring Program, feel free to reach out to me. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Eric.
Yes, that was fantastic. Eric, if you would stop your share.
Yes.
I have little pocket books that people might be interested in. And I don't know if people can see this, and I don't know if it's still available. Do you know, Eric?
Yeah, I think we can still get, it's going to be a little out of date, but I think you can, we might still have some within Sea Grant, might have some.
And that's where I got it. It's called Invaders of the Great Lakes, and I got it through the Michigan Sea Grant. And then there's a pocket guide from Michigan State. You can go on to their books department and get this, I'm hoping. And it's about invasive plants in Michigan's natural communities, and it has a section on aquatics that's really nice. And I like this one because I don't know if the newer ones have this. I have one of the originals, but it actually has a tool that you can measure with.
That's right. Yeah, that is helpful.
And it fits in your pocket, both of these, which is nice when you're out identifying plants. So I just thought I'd spotlight those.
And I believe you can download that second one you can download a PDF for free. So if you don't want to purchase the book, you should be able to find it and download it, which is less helpful, but nice to have the information.
No, thank you, because that was my next thing I was going to mention. I have it on my phone, so it's really handy. I can just bring everything up on my phone and check stuff. As Eric mentioned, we're going to have Claire Peterson from MSU presenting on MISSN. And it's all about how to download it, how to use it, why it's important for us to be identifying these plants, and what they do with the information once they receive it. And then Dan O'Keefe is going to be with us on March 24th doing a Great Lakes Invaders and Ecology. So it's taking the information Eric just gave it, but we're moving further out away from inland to what's going on with our Great Lakes and about the issues that we're dealing with there. Eric, I want to thank you again. That was very informative. I hope everyone really enjoyed it. And thank you everyone for joining us, and we hope to see you next time.
Sue, we've got a couple questions.
Oh,
One is somebody wants the name of the second pocket guide that you held up.
it's called a Field Identification Guide to Invasive Plants in Michigan's Natural Communities. And if it's still for sale, go to the MSU bookstore.
I'm attempting to see
And
if
the
I
other
can
question,
get it right now. Go ahead, Ruth.
Eric,
Sorry.
is one individual brought up the same thing I did, Phragmites, with a couple of question marks. If you could just briefly address that.
Yeah, will do. So Phragmites Phragmites australis is the plant, and also known as giant reed. If anyone lives, oh boy, in southern half of the southern peninsula, they likely have seen Phragmites along the highway, along roads, along ditches. This is a grass that can grow 12 plus feet and create an impenetrable wall. It's rhizomatous, so it has rhizomes, underground stems that spread like crazy, and it creates a monoculture. So this is a plant, like especially if you're in Southeast Michigan, it's everywhere. The Great Lakes coastline, our inland water bodies, our ditches. Unfortunately, it's a super invader, but there are groups out there that are working, and a lot of research happening out there to try to figure out how to get rid of this, because we have herbicides, but when it's covering thousands of acres, we have to start thinking about other means of management if our goal is to get rid of it, or at least get it under control. So Phragmites is a big grass that's invasive.
Eric, I just put up some photos of Phragmites for people.
Perfect, thank you. Yeah. As you can see, it's great, to see this person down, like how tall it gets.
Yes, and I have it on our beach, and I know how tall it gets because I'm not tall, and it towers over me when I try to walk by it. And you're right, you can't walk through it.
Yep. And the leaves are sharp, and so I've had people get stitches because of getting it slicing their hand and things like that. So it's an unpleasant plant.
Okay, it looks like we have another question in the Q&A. Oh, somebody wants to know if this is going to be available because they missed the first part. Yes, it will be available on recording. And we'll be sending that out once we're notified by Zoom what the link is to that recording.
And I'd be happy to, if it would be nice for anybody, because this was a lot of identification, if they would like the slides, I can either provide it to Ruth or Sue, I can provide my slides to, or if you would like any of those slides, I can send them directly to you. So feel free to reach out and email me, and I can send you my slides.
That would be wonderful if you would. You can send them to Sue.
To Sue.
And we'll work together to get them out.
Also, thank you very much, everybody. Any other questions?
Looks like we got a couple more. You get a thank you for the presentation.
Excellent.
And yes, and a yes, please send the slides. So definitely people want to hear more,
I
learn
think
more.
I'm really close to, I might be able to get this PDF of the book that Sue just mentioned. So if we can just hold on for a moment, I can put that in the comments.
That would be great.
And actually, I'm going to give this link right here. This is the state of Michigan has an invasive species website. And what I just sent is a link that has a bunch of PDFs for identifying invasive species on top there. And it has the one that Sue mentioned, and it has a few more. If you want, there's that Michigan Boaters Guide. If you click on that link, and if that is, if that's something you would like, I actually have copies, and I can get those to you.
That would
So there's
be,
a lot of resources out there.
yeah. Yes.
That's great. Thank you very much. You've got a bunch of thank yous in the question and answers as well. So thanks for spending time with us tonight.
You're welcome.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.
Thanks, Eric.
Thank you, Norm. I like how everyone had the nice the Eurasian milfoil backgrounds. That was a good touch.
We thought it was appropriate. It's a Shutterstock special, but it's amazing what you can find on Shutterstock.
Oh yeah, it's impressive. We've started to use a program called Canva, and it has a repository of pictures, and it's amazing what's there.
Okay.
Okay, Vicki, I think we're good for you to end the meeting.
Okay.
Good night, all.
Good night.
Good night.